Nigeria's August inflation hits 17.6%. And President of Mozambique pledges to work with the IMF on the terms of an international audit of its public debt. Plus, Moody's says political infighting, weak economic growth and mounting debt of state-owned companies pose a risk to South Africa's credit rating. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. This is Business Incorporated live from Lagos. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwagu. I will begin with Nigeria's headline inflation, which is now at 17.6% for the month of August. Our data released by the National Bureau of Statistics today shows that the August inflation was 1.0% higher from the rate recorded in July. According to the data, the major divisions responsible for the increase in the headline index were housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuel, and others are fuel, education and transportation services. The food index rose by 16.4% in August, up by 0.6% from 15.8% posted the previous month. The urban index increased by 19.3% from 18.9% the previous month, while the rural index increased by 16.1% from 15.5% in July. And the President of Mozambique has pledged to work with the International Monetary Fund on the terms of an international audit of its public debt. President Filipe Nyusi met with IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde in Washington, where he tried to reassure international institutions and investors over a debt scandal involving more than $2 billion in secret loans that came to light this year. The IMF has suspended its own lending to the Southeast African country, one of the world's poorest, insisting on external scrutiny as a precursor to resuming financial aid. Mozambique's parliament and its Attorney General's office have launched an investigation into the undisclosed borrowings in 2013 and 2014, but the government has balked at opening its books to outside auditors. An IMF staff team will be sent to Maputo next week. A global rating agency Moody's says political infighting, weak economic growth and mounting debt of state-owned companies all pose a risk to South Africa's credit ratings. Moody's, which rates Africa's most industrialized economy 2 notches above sub-investment grade, says its negative outlook reflected wide and rising political divisions that generate policy uncertainty and impede structural reforms. President Jacob Zuma and Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan are locked in a power struggle over spending at state-owned companies and plans for a multi-billion-dollar nuclear power program. Zuma denied this week that there was a war between the presidency and Treasury. Moody's affirmed its Baa2 rating on South Africa in May. Fitch and S&P Global Ratings have South Africa one step above sub-investment or junk with negative outlooks, while all three are expected to make their next ratings decisions in December. Now let's look at the global markets now. In Europe, the U.S. Department of Justice is asking Deutsche Bank to pay $14 billion to settle an investigation into mortgage-backed securities. However, Deutsche Bank says it has no intention to settle these potential civil claims anywhere near the figures cited. Let's join my colleague Conrad Busen at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange to see how this news is playing out in the market. Good afternoon, Conrad. Now, U.S. is asking Deutsche Bank for $14 billion to settle mortgage investigation. What is the latest on this now? Although the bank says it's not going to pay that money, how does the bank move forward from here?
Well, Jimmy, let me give you the latest development of the share price first. It's down more than 8% compared to last night's closing price, because even if Deutsche Bank was able to settle with the U.S. Justice Department for round about half of the amount that the Department of Justice asks to be paid at the moment, say $7 billion US dollars, this would exceed the amount of money that Deutsche Bank at the moment has set aside in its books for all of the legal cases that Deutsche Bank is involved in. That amount is at the moment around about 5.5 billion euros. And that means that for the market people, Deutsche Bank will not be able to cope with this without a capital increase, without demanding fresh capital from its investors, something which is going to be very difficult given that Deutsche Bank at the moment has to cope with a lot of problems in its core business. It has to cope with its own profitability, with costs, etc. Something else is being discussed here at the exchange in Frankfurt. The question how and how much politics are playing a role in this. You know, we've been discussing here in Europe how, or we've been discussing lately, how here the European authorities have been treating companies like Google or Apple. People here wonder whether this strong and high fine that Deutsche Bank is threatened with by the US Justice Department might not be some sort of act of retaliation against the actions of the European authorities. And also we are in the middle of the presidential election campaigns in the United States. The old administration might be inclined here to show how tough it is acting against, you know, business wrongdoing. That's of course evaluations very difficult to really say whether they are true or not. But the mere fact that they are being discussed means that nervousness and uncertainty among investors with regard to Deutsche Bank increases.
Well, Conrad, I think it might not be far from that, considering what the EU has done with Apple there. Now, let's look at the summit by the EU leaders. You know, they are trying to discuss future direction of the bloc at the summit without the UK. Now, are the EU leaders forcing UK out of the room already?
There are people who see it that way. The conservative newspaper The Times in London complains that the UK government was treated like a pariah state, like an outcast by the other 27 governments. But as so very often, the colleagues in London are not really well informed about what's really going on in Brussels. This meeting today in Bratislava, Slovakia's capital, the meeting of the members of the heads of state of the EU minus Theresa May of the UK. This is not a regular EU summit where, of course, Theresa May, as the UK is still a member of the EU, would have to be invited. No, this is not a regular summit. This is a meeting of the heads of state where they want to reflect about the potential future of the EU, about the question where the EU is heading. Now, the UK government, Theresa May, has made it quite clear that Brexit means Brexit, that it has no interest in discussing the future of the EU. So why should they join the other members of state, other heads of state of the member state?
Now, Conrad, I guess we have to wrap up this conversation here, and we look forward to a better week next week as the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Japan plans to meet. In the meantime, I would like you to enjoy your weekend. Thank you for your time, Conrad. I will move on now to Asia. Stocks rose on Friday in a relatively quiet session as several markets in the region were shut, while traders looked ahead to next week's key central bank meetings in the US and Japan. Markets in China, Taiwan, South Korea and Hong Kong were closed for public holidays. In Australia, the ASX 200 advanced 56.83 points, with most sectors climbing. Japan's Nikkei 225 gained 0.70%, while the Topix index was up 10.39 points.